What is good, guys? Welcome to my channel, where today we're doing a long exposure tutorial for beginners to let you take some photos like this and this. So let's get into it. Before you can begin taking long exposure photos, there are a few bits of equipment which are necessary in order to capture those images. These things include an ND filter, a shutter release cable, a tripod, and something moving in your image. Long exposure usually include clouds, water, or lights. Right, let's get started taking long exposure photos. Step number 1, mount your camera on a tripod so there is no camera shake. Taking long exposure photos using handheld is literally impossible. Step number 2, composing your image and setting the camera to the right settings. Once you have found your composure, you're going to want to go ahead and set the camera settings. First of all, when taking landscape photos, I would recommend having an aperture of around f7 or f8 to get a nice depth of field and a lot of the scenery in focus. Now let's move on to the most important setting during long exposures, the exposure, or the shutter speed. So for your exposure, you're going to want to go ahead and set it as if you were just taking a normal photo and not even thinking about long exposure. Once you've got your exposure set correctly, so the image is to your liking, go ahead and note down your shutter speed. You're going to need this for later. Step number 3 is finding your focus. When locking your focus, you're going to want to use manual focus. This is because when the ND filter is on your lens, the automatic focus is going to be hunted around the image. However, with the ND filter on, it's not going to be able to find a focus point. So go ahead and use the manual focus to focus your image how you would like it to be. The next step is putting your ND filter onto your lens. ND filters can be quite expensive for a beginner, although there are some great budget options, and I'll leave some links in the description below. Once you've screwed on your ND filter, you won't be able to see through the live view or viewfinder of your camera. But don't worry, because your focus is already set, you've already composed your image. Now there's only 2 more steps. The penultimate step is setting your exposure to bulb mode. This is usually the next shutter speed after 30 seconds in your camera settings. But how long should you leave the shutter open for? Essentially, you have to compensate for the amount of stops of exposure the ND filter is taken away. The easiest way to do this is to use an app or a website. The one that I personally use is the Lee Exposure Guide app. You simply put in your original exposure, the amount of stops of light that the ND filter is taken away, and it tells you how long you should have your shutter open for to get the perfect exposure. Alternatively, you can just play around with the shutter speed yourself in order to get the best exposure for your liking. Open the shutter for maybe 40 seconds, take the shot. Is it too dark? Make the shutter speed longer. Is it too bright? Make the shutter speed shorter. Simple. And that is how to get the perfect long exposure for beginners. I hope you all found that video useful and are going to go and take some great long exposure photos. Massive thank you for tuning in. Hope you've enjoyed yourself. If you did, leave a like, subscribe, and go take some banging photos.